The sittings of the Tobago House of Assembly Legislature will resume on Thursday, September 26th from 1:30 p.m. and the Minority Councillor has listed 4 questions. The motion for the 29th sitting, which will be moved by Assemblyman Farley Augustine, bases its argument on the separation of agencies for the management of tourism in Tobago as separate from Trinidad, and the fact that the National Tourism Policy of 2010 is now being revised. The motion emphasizes that there is no established national regulatory tourism authority and is seeking support for the Tobago House of Assembly to construct a Tobago bill to establish the Tobago Regulatory Authority to oversee the adherence of regulations in the sector to be set out by the Tobago House of Assembly. Join us for another debate on your future in Chambers, Tobago Channel 5, YouTube or Facebook channels live. Let me also take this opportunity to wish you a happy Republic Day.
Oath of allegiance of a new member. Announcements by presiding officer. Let me welcome the honorable members back to the House after the recess to the 29th sitting, and state that this is the 3rd time we are returning after recess, and I hope that we all commit to ensuring that we adhere to the standing orders so we can continue to conduct this House as it is expected. Let me take this opportunity on behalf of the House to say to all the victims of the floods that we have recently experienced that our thoughts and our prayers are with you, and we will continue to work towards ensuring that you can get back on your feet in the future. And let me extend apologies I've received from the minority leader. He's going to be absent today, and also from the leader of Assembly Business. It has been recommended by the Chief Secretary that Councillor Dr. Agartha Carrington would instead be the leader of Assembly Business today. I also would like to specially welcome our specially invited guests and others who are here with us in the public gallery today, and those who are viewing from elsewhere. Thank you. Assembly bills sent back from Cabinet. Assembly laws brought back from Parliament. Petitions. Papers.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer, and it is indeed a pleasure to be back, and I hope you had a good holiday over the period as well. And to all my colleagues, welcome back. Madam Presiding Officer, I have the pleasure this afternoon of tabling the following papers in this Honorable House. The Tobago House of Assembly's monthly budget report as at the end of April 2019. The Tobago House of Assembly's monthly budget report at the end of May 2019. The Tobago House of Assembly's monthly budget report as at the end of June 2019. And the Tobago House of Assembly's monthly budget report as at the end of July 2019.
Presentation of reports from Dispute Resolution Commission, select committees, questions to secretaries,
Questions for oral answer.
Question number 68 to the Secretary of Health, Wellness and Family Development by the Minority Councillor.
Good afternoon to the members of the House. Question number 68 to the Secretary of Health, Wellness and Family Development. As it relates to the Tobago Regional Health Authority, please indicate the following. The balances outstanding to the various vendors for medical supplies and services, which includes medical equipment, biochemistry reagents, imaging consumables, outsourced diagnostic and other tests, as at the 1st of May 2019. Please outline the name of each vendor, the type of service or supply received from each vendor, and the balance owing. And B, please indicate whether these outstanding balances have negatively affected the quality of care provided by the Tobago Regional Health Authority, specifically indicating the negative impact and measures put in place to minimize those impacts.
Secretary of Health, Wellness and Family Development.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. And welcome to my colleagues returning from our recent break. Madam Presiding Officer, as at the 1st of May 2019, the total outstanding to creditors stood at 15.44 million, of which 50%, 8.145 million, was for the transfer of critically ill patients to Trinidad. The list is presented under 8 headings, namely outsourced diagnostic services, medical supplies, medical and biomedical waste, medical service, medical equipment and medical supplies, medical equipment and servicing, and medical equipment. These suppliers for outsourced diagnostic services include, and not limited to, West Shore Medical Specialist Clinics of the Tobago, St. Augustine Medical Lab, with respect to medical supplies and biochemical reagents, Central Medical and Industrial Supplies. With respect to medical supplies, the list includes, but not limited to, Trias Medical Sales and Services, Transcontinental Medical Products, Physicians Pharmaceuticals Limited, Procare Limited, Massey Gas Products, AB Scientific Products. With respect to biomedical waste, these include Keston Jerry et al. With respect to medical services, Medical Research Foundation. With respect to medical equipment, these include Steed Medical Caribbean and A.A. Keys. With respect to medical equipment and servicing, these include L&W Engineering Equipment, DNA and Associates, Curis Technologies, Biomedical, Enterprises of Trinidad and Tobago. With respect to medical equipment, Very Medical and Scientific Company Limited. The total of these include 15.441, 118.39. With respect to the Part B of the question, in our efforts to maintain the care provided by the TRH to our population, the following actions have been pursued. Arrangements with providers of reagents for rescheduling of payments, review of our preventive maintenance schedules, strengthening of our materials management systems, outsourcing of services where necessary. For example, the services outsourced are services that are not available on this island, and more importantly, the reduction of waste where waste exists. I thank you.
Question number 69 would have been to the Secretary of Infrastructure, Quarries and the Environment. However, given that the Leader of Assembly Business is absent, This question will be deferred. Question number 70 to the Secretary of Tourism, Culture and Transportation.
Question number 70. In April 2018, the Tobago Festivals Commission and the Tobago House of Assembly announced that it was hiring Dr. Ralph Henry to conduct a comprehensive economic impact assessment of the Tobago Jazz experience. At the 22nd sitting of the Tobago House of Assembly, the Secretary with responsibility for tourism, culture, and transportation indicated that the report was indeed received and the Executive Council was reviewing the report with an intention to determine whether and when the report will be released to the public. Please indicate the key findings of that report and when and where the complete report will be available to the public.
Secretary of Tourism, Culture and Transportation.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I wish to first correct the record. At the 22nd sitting, my response to the Minority Councillor's question, and I quote from Hansard, after review, it will be tabled at the Executive Council for consideration, end quote. At no time did I indicate that the Executive Council was reviewing this report. In response to the question today, Madam Presiding Officer, I'm advised that this report is being reviewed by the technical team at the Division of Finance and the Economy, and further clarification on the submission is required.
Am I to then infer that the Executive Council has not gotten the report as yet?
The report has not yet been tabled at the Executive Council.
Question number 71 to the Chief Secretary and Secretary of Education, Innovation and Energy by the Minority Councillor.
Question number 71. According to the THA's website, www.tha.gov.tt, in May 2018, and I quote, joint committee between the Tobago House of Assembly and Caribbean Airlines Limited had been set up to monitor the recent $50 change fee introduced by Caribbean Airlines, end quote. The committee was scheduled to operate, and I quote, for a 6-month period effective June 1st, 2018 until November 30th, 2018, and had been given the mandate to review and evaluate the introduction of the change fee, end quote. Please indicate whether the report was presented, the key findings of the report, and when and where the complete report will be made available to the public.
Chief Secretary.
Thank you very much, Madam Presiding Officer. May I advise this Honorable House that 2 copies of the report were submitted to the Office of the Chief Secretary, one of which was forwarded to the Chairman of CAL, and the Office of the Chief Secretary is currently awaiting confirmation in respect of a mutually acceptable date for the formal presentation of the report to representatives of both entities.
Thank you. End of questions.
Request for leave to move the adjournment of the Assembly on definite matters of urgent public importance. Statements by secretaries or assistant secretaries. Personal explanations. Introduction of bills. Motions relating to the business or sitting of the Assembly and moved by a secretary or assistant secretary. Public business. executive council business, private business, motion.
Representative for Speyside, Lansumi.
Thank you very much, Madam Presiding Officer. Don't feel any way. Plenty of people have problems recalling the very lengthy name of my electoral district. And as I rise for our first sitting, having returned from our break, I wish to start by, as I have done in the past, thanking the members of my electoral district for this privilege to represent them, and by extension, the issues requiring debate and resolution by the general Tobago public. Let me greet all my colleagues, including your good self, Madam Presiding Officer, and I trust that everyone did have somewhat of a restful break, notwithstanding the nature of our jobs. I don't know if rest is ever part of it. And also allow me, Madam Presiding Officer, before getting to the motion, to express sympathy along with my colleagues in the House for those who were adversely affected by the activities associated with Storm Karen. And I know some industries and some communities were hit harder than others, but collectively we are all grateful to God for plentiful mercies that we would have received this time around. And at another juncture and at another place, perhaps, we will debate the effectiveness of our response. But let me also say thank you, special thank you to the first responders that have done extremely well. Today, the motion for debate reads, whereas the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago approved the formation of separate agencies to treat with tourism development and marketing, namely the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited, beginning operations in 2017, and the Trinidad Tourism Limited, and whereas the National Tourism Policy of 2010 is now being revised, and whereas there is a 3-year roadmap developed by the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited, and whereas there is no established national regulatory tourism authority by the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, and current standards require only voluntary compliance, be it resolved that the Tobago House of Assembly uses its powers as established in the 5th Schedule of the THA Act to develop mandatory regulations for the accommodation, restaurant, tour guide, and other critical services and sectors within the tourism industry, and be it further resolved that the THA establishes a committee of appropriately qualified individuals to construct a THA bill to be subsequently sent to Parliament to establish the Tobago Regulatory Authority to oversee the adherence to regulations that will be set by the THA. Madam Presiding Officer, the greatest threat to the tourism industry in Tobago may not be the vagaries of the global market. It may not even be climate change and the resulting natural disasters. It may not be a global recession that some believe will happen next year. It may not even be the fall of airlines and travel agencies. But I wish to posit that perhaps the greatest threat to our industry at the moment is the fact that we have a tourism industry that is generally very unregulated. And when I say unregulated, it does not mean that we don't have laws within the country, within our jurisdiction, that governs certain aspects of how we build and how we operate businesses. But when it comes to regulating the tourism sector as a service industry, there is a significant gap. And I hope that by the end of my presentation, my colleagues on the other side will see merit in my argument. The motion, Madam Presiding Officer, is not about an attempt to stymie the creativity of Tobagonians. So regulations in no way stop people from being creative and being their best self. But what it does is that it ensures that we are able to achieve good quality control or quality assurance. It ensures that we have a mechanism or a yardstick by which we can measure all entities within the tourism sector. You know, as a boy growing up with my grandparents, right above the old recreation road in Luciville, Speyside, there was a particular tradition that I was party to. And this tradition, Madam Presiding Officer, I'm sure many others in this house and across Tobago is familiar with this tradition. In my grandparents' house, I had a cabinet or a buffet or a hutch, whatever you call it, and it was filled with glassware that you dared not touch, except at Christmas time when you wash them and you place them back. You will be lucky if you get to sip some chocolate tea in one of those teacups that's in the cabinet. However, what I observed at my grandparents' house was that when we have visitors, whenever we had visitors, visitors were afforded the best treatment. So visitors got to drink from the same glassware that you could not touch. Visitors get their share of the food first. And if meat was scarce, as it was sometimes scarce in my grandparents' house, visitors also got their share first. And if visitors needed to spend the night, they may end up with your bed and pillow and you had to bunk with some little cousins somewhere else. Now, the truth is, I'm not in 100% agreement with the tradition. But there is a critical lesson in the tradition that I think is important for this debate. I'm not in agreement fully because the reality is sometimes that kind of tradition allows us to overextend ourselves. It allows other people to manipulate us and exploit us. And sometimes, quite frankly, I felt like my grandparents were cutting off their noses to spoil the face, just so that they can make visitors feel welcome. But the important takeaway from the tradition that I think we must hold on to is that whenever we have visitors, we must offer our visitors our best self and our best service. And it's amazing that we have evolved to a place where sometimes you feel as if Tobagonians within the service sector see service as servitude. And that's not necessarily the case. And I've always wondered what happened to that tradition where we gave our visitors the best of what we had to offer. And so that is a precursor to the motion I wish to move today. Because it's not just about creating regulations for the sector for the sake of creating regulations, but it's about creating regulations to ensure that there's quality assurance, to ensure that there's consistency, to minimize the number of bad reviews that we may get. And as I was preparing the motion, two things influenced me. The first is that tomorrow is actually World Tourism Day. The 27th of September every year is World Tourism Day. And this year the theme is Tourism and Jobs, a Better Future for All. In fact, just yesterday, I had the privilege of witnessing the children at the Speyside Early Childhood Center, who has as their year theme, the school has as its year theme, Tourism, Island Vibes. And so we took the opportunity to visit and tour some of the tourist sites within the community. But second to that reality, I happened to see a review online of a service that is popular in Tobago, and then I was subsequently sent a message, a direct message, or what we call DM, about the fact that we have folks operating boat tours that should not really be operating boat tours because they are not legitimate. And I wish to read excerpts from both the review and from that direct message. And of course, I will leave the names out. The review started, "My beyond ordinary glass bottom experience. After being gangstered to hand over our money and to get on the boat at Pigeon Point Jetty, imagine the confusion as my friends and I listened to 3 grown men curse each other for $300. We finally boarded. Not even a minute into the trip, and instead of my lungs being filled with ocean air, I had the displeasure of inhaling secondhand weed smoke from the underage children who decided to entertain us by hosting a Gaza karaoke, raising their imaginary AKs, 9mm, and other weapons. Finally, the nylon pool. I jumped in the water to escape the madness I was experiencing. A gentleman who was on the boat with us expressed his utter disgust that his family was exposed to this unprofessionalism by the captain and his special guests. He said, and she's quoting, the reviewer is quoting the guest, "We boarded at Tobago, and if I didn't see you guys coming on the boat, we would have come off." With embarrassment, my voice apologized on Tobago's behalf. "It's not usually like this," I said. Relaxing, trying to experience the best of it, only to look up and see the self-proclaimed ghetto youths standing on our towels to take a photo. At this point, all sense of reason left my body. After a photo shoot, we got back on the boat, and let's just say the trip back was just as ridiculous. More weed, more Gaza karaoke, and more underage drinking. I felt like we crashed their party, and boy, we were out of place. Did I mention this is one of the most popular reef boats on the island? Do better. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not ready. This can't be it. Is this what Tobago has to offer? Hashtag beyond embarrass. Hashtag beyond shock. Hashtag beyond hurt. Now, Madam Presiding Officer, this review on Facebook only garnered 98 shares, meaning it was shared 98 times. It had 189 reactions and 190 comments. Now, that may seem like a lot, but the truth is it could have become much more viral than that, especially if the person doing the review was an outsider, well-connected outsider. Or worse yet, if the person doing the review was one of those social media influencers, and that is a profession now. There are young people going around the world as influencers and just getting paid to wear brand name products and take glamorous photos all over the world. Imagine if it was one of those with the tens of thousands of followers. And then, around the same time, I got a direct message because I was attempting to promote the operation of a young man who was offering tours to see dolphins. And a well-known tour company, the manager of a well-known tour company, direct messaged me, and she said, "Hi there, that is great. We don't have anything against encouraging new operators, but it's not about I have access to a boat and that anybody can offer tours. We've worked very hard to get our licenses and qualifications at a cost, so it makes it very hard when beach hustlers pretend to be tour operators without any kind of vetting. A TFT licensed boat is only licensed to carry 2 fishermen, nobody else. If anything happens to any visitor, it is a great risk to them. If they are not a registered business with a tour badge, they're not even meant to be openly advertising such services. Proper businesses like us at the moment cannot even compete with the ridiculous prices some people are being offered. Often, touts only collect money, but don't have anything to do with a business. They don't have to buy gas, food, drink, boat maintenance, which is very expensive, paying for a crew, etc. She continued on and on and on. Now, Madam Presiding Officer, my initial reaction was, but this woman bad mind. Why she just allow the youth to strive? He trying a thing. But then the more I looked at it, the more logical I became. And I said, but if it is, we have a licensing regime that prescribes the number of passengers per boat and so on. How is it that people could just get away with just randomly offering a service, advertising it online, making monies from it, and never being stopped? It clearly means that we have a massive gap in the system. And what is that gap? The gap is that the system is unregulated. And furthermore, I have discovered that many people are taking issue with how the reef boat operators are conducting their businesses, especially on the southwest of the island. Thankfully, in Speyside, they have a lot more home training, and so they behave a lot more professionally. But if we are having folks having issues with how they operate their business, and they continue unfettered, unregulated, at some point, all that it will take is an accident or a bad review, and we'll be out of business. And we can't afford for that to happen. And as I investigated some more, I found out that, we have one maritime surveyor on the island that works extremely hard to police the reef. However, supporting resources and manpower are quite limited. And so the illegal activity continues almost unabated. And so I came to framing the motion with these incidents in mind. And in the preamble of the motion, I sought to establish some fun facts. And I want to establish those fun facts in the preamble of the motion because I know it is a common response. Well, something like that happening already, and so there's no need for us to do anything. And I wish to disagree strongly with that position. Because you see, we in Tobago and in the Tobago House of Assembly, for once must take the Prime Minister's advice and mind my own business. We have to mind my business. And it doesn't matter, and I want to say it now, I don't care how insensitive it sounds. It doesn't matter what the central government is trying to do for the last decade or 5 years and doing unsuccessfully. We have a responsibility to the Tobago electorate, and they do not want to hear that central government was planning this and it didn't work out. They want to know that we did what we are supposed, or what we were supposed to do. So fun fact 1 in the preamble is that the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited, or TTAL, was established in 2017. And the reality is that that body is primarily responsible for product development and marketing. And the body may promote a list of standards for each sector in the industry, as it's already doing, because it's collaborating with the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, with the Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Industry Certificate Program for the accommodation, taxi operations, and for tour guiding sectors. In fact, TTAL is managing that certificate process in Tobago. But notwithstanding that, TTAL has no teeth when it comes to ensuring that people uphold basic standards. And the reality is that the agency, with its paltry budget, and I've said it before, I wish the agency will get a lot more money than it gets. And hopefully this is one of the things that the national budget will address. But with its paltry budget, TTAL will go out, it will market the island, do whatever it needs to do. And perchance somebody love the campaign, get excited about Tobago. They saw glamorous photos. They saw myself and the Secretary for Tourism dancing cocoa and so on, and they get excited. They want to come and try out their hand and see if they could outwine the area representative. And then they show up in Tobago. One horrible service. Perhaps they found a place on Airbnb, unregulated. When they get to the place, it's a hellhole. The experience becomes absolutely crappy. And the next thing we know is that all the millions, as paltry as it is, that we would have spent on marketing the island would have just been wasted on just one poor review from one customer. That's all it takes. It doesn't take a large contingent of people to make a bad review for the island to do poorly. All it takes is one. Fun fact 2 in the preamble, Madam Presiding Officer, acknowledges that the national tourism policy expired since 2010. And now I know that there is a schedule that they have been following for consultations. But what year are we in? 2019. So we have expired one and almost 2 terms from 2 different central governments, 2 different cabinets, because next year we'll bring to a close a second cabinet since the national policy expired, and Trinidad and Tobago still does not have a new policy. We're still doing consultations almost 10 years later. I really don't know in what serious country that we will wait until the policy expires before doing work for a new policy. The best practice really is to, a few years or maybe a year or so before it expires, start doing the work so that you can roll out a new policy almost without haste subsequent to the expiration of the existing one. And that has not happened. And so, personally, Madam Presiding Officer, I really don't care where the national tourism policy is, because based on the 5th schedule, the THA has a responsibility for tourism in Tobago. So if the national tourism policy, is in a mess, it's non-existent, it expired, they're still doing consultations almost 10 years after, THA, the Tobago House of Assembly, should be in a position to chart its own course with or without the central government. I mean, after all, we're making noise to run our own show for greater autonomy. It's time we start to demonstrate it. Fun fact number 3, I also acknowledge in the preamble that TTAL has a 3-year roadmap. And while the specifics for that roadmap was never brought to this House for debate, we did debate a motion in this House that sought to get the support of the House for the activities of the agency and by extension, the supervising division. But that roadmap, contained in that roadmap, may have policy directives for a regulated industry. But again, TTAL has no legal power to come up with regulations and force people to abide by them. Let's be practical. I am operating a hotel. The photos on my website were the same photos posted there since the hotel just opened. So everything looks nice and new and clean and good. And then you go to the hotel and it's a big back TV. And you have to pound the TV for it to work. By the way, that was my experience 3 years ago at a hotel in Tobago. But TTAL cannot go into that hotel and demand that they modernize their infrastructure and demand that they meet certain requirements, because TTAL does not have such legislative powers. And so that's one of the things this motion is seeking to correct. Fun fact number 4, the preamble also acknowledges that there are some standards posted up by different agencies. We have the National Tourism Regulatory Authority, and I found out that there's actually a draft. Arthur Lock Jack School of Business did a draft for a National Tourism Regulatory Authority, and that was being advanced by the then Minister, Shamfa Kojo, who has since moved from that ministry. And since then, I'm hearing that we're debating now whether we should have a separate agency or whether we should use the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards to do it. And then we're discovering, after Arthur Lock Jack did an entire draft document, that no impact assessment was done. They just did a draft of what the laws could look like, and they did research around the world and pulled together something, but no real impact assessment was done. And so we don't know whether that National Tourism Regulatory Authority will ever materialize. But again, I say, that ain't our business. Our business is Tobago's business. And if the National Parliament falls asleep at the wheels, we cannot afford to fall asleep at the wheels for Tobago. We can't. And then I looked on the Ministry of Tourism website, Madam Presiding Officer. I'm looking for those regulations that governs the sector. And as I look, I see the ministry has up a list of 29 laws that directly impacts the tourism sector. And of course, they also have up the expired National Tourism Policy. Ironically, one of the legislations listed is the THA Act of 1996. And that's why we are here today, because we do have the power in law to do something about it. They also have up things like property tax, freedom of information, corporation tax, workmen compensation, industrial relations, OSHA, all of these acts, and so on and so on. But these really don't regulate the services provided by the tourism industry. And that's what I want us to get at. And then there's the National Bureau of Standards. And I spoke about the certificate program that they have. But here's what the very website of the Bureau of Standards says. It says that the Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Industry Certification Program, which is a national certification program currently implemented in Tobago through TTAL. The TTIC allows for an independent body or third party to give written assurance that tourism operators conform to specified requirements outlined within the relevant national standard. Right? That sounds good. Certified tourism operators, I quote, through this program can include tour guides, tour operators, short-term motor vehicle rental operations, bed and breakfast and self-catering facilities, hotels and guest houses, and tourist land transport service providers. And then it says something that shocked me. It says TTIC is a voluntary national quality assurance tool that is valid for a period of 1 year. In other words, all of this fancy thing that the Bureau of Standards offering is voluntary. So I could just say to hell with the National Bureau of Standards, and nobody could stop me from operating just so. Because this certification program that is meant to ensure that there's quality assurance only requires voluntary participation. The law doesn't mandate that if you're in the sector, you have to do this certificate program so you can keep upgrading yourself and updating your knowledge bank. It doesn't. And so with all of these in mind, the motion resolves to do two things. One, we use powers as established in the 5th schedule of the THA Act to develop mandatory regulations for the accommodation, restaurant, tour guide, and other critical services and sectors within the tourism industry. So, it is calling on the respective division and agencies to sit down and to work out some of these mandatory regulations that we want to govern our tourism sector. But more than that, the motion is also resolving that we establish a committee of appropriately qualified individuals to construct a THA bill to be subsequently sent to Parliament, which is something we can do, which will then establish the Tobago Regulatory Authority to oversee the adherence to regulations that will be set by the THA. So we're not just saying the THA should come up with these regulations to govern the industry. We are saying that we should find a committee of appropriately qualified people to construct a THA bill that we will send down to Parliament. When last we sent down a THA bill to Parliament? Now is a good time to send one. And when I say appropriately qualified individuals, I'm talking about the legal minds. I'm talking about those who have the wherewithal and know how to construct a law. I'm not saying that we should sit down and do that inside here. But I'm saying we should, through this motion, empower the Executive Council to establish such a committee that can construct a THA bill to be sent down to Parliament. That will allow for the Tobago Regulatory Authority that will impose those regulations and not just voluntary standards upon the tourism sector here. Why is this important? What are some of the merits for having this? Well, I have already established that the Trinidad and Tobago government is already thinking about it. They tried doing something about it, and quite frankly, we don't know how far and fast that will go. But as I said, let me mind with business. Whether they get it done before their term comes to an end, whether they change directions altogether, whether they don't want it or not, we should mind our business and get our regulatory framework in order. Secondly, having a Tobago Regulatory Authority, and I know that those opposite, they love to amend motions, especially if it's coming from this side. You are free to amend it and change the name to whatever you want to call it. I have no problem with what you call it. There is nothing in a name in this regard, so long as the objectives are being met. And so the second reason for having it is that the authority will develop regulations and standards and guidelines that will allow for those quality assurance measures. And it will be able to do so in a kind of evolutionary kind of manner. Because the regulations that you may set up today may not be the regulations you want 10 years from now. So this is a dynamic thing. It's something that changes. And so you need a regulatory authority to keep reviewing those regulations from time to time. Thirdly, we will have an additional reason, an additional basis rather, for the star ratings that hotels and accommodation enterprises in Tobago have been giving themselves from time to time. I am highly suspicious of some of the star ratings some of our establishments have been banding about. I know in some jurisdictions, like in the US, for example, AAA does the rating for the hotels and the accommodation sector, and AAA does it for United States and Mexico and Canada, and they even do it for Caribbean territories. And of course, they have a whole process. You have to meet 27 basic requirements and so on. And they will send people there clandestinely to experience the service and then rate you. All of these are things that we can empower through legislation, a Tobago Regulatory Authority. Then, having this authority will allow us to sign deals with online holiday rentals, like Airbnb. And I wish to draw our attention to what happened in Cayman Islands in March 2018. And by the way, Cayman Islands isn't the only territory in the region or the world that is doing deals with Airbnb. But if you look on the Cayman Compass on March 21st, 2018, in an article written by James Whitaker. It says that the deal will give tourism officials a degree of oversight to help ensure properties being rented to visitors were up to standard and compliant with regulatory requirements, including being licensed to the Hotel Licensing Board and paying visitor room taxes. Additionally, Airbnb, the company, will be hosting 2 town hall meetings per year in the Cayman Islands, along with government officials, to educate its hosts on the regulatory obligations and to provide information to people who wanted to rent their rooms using the service. Such a deal will not be possible for Tobago at this present time, because it was possible for Cayman Islands because they already have a regulatory body in charge of managing the tourism sector. And so it was easy for Airbnb to use them or to partner with the island for ensuring that what we want, that kind of cottage tourism, village tourism, the Castara experience, is managed and there is consistency around the island. The fifth reason rather why this is a good idea is that it will bring greater order to the industry. It will deter some of the fly-by-night operators. So it will mean that every Farley, Ansel, and Kelvin can just get up and just open up shop just so. You will have to meet some basic requirements by law.
Might I remind you about name calling in the house?
Well, I was calling very general names, but let me replace them with Tom, Dick, and Harry. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry. That might be more appropriate to your standards and the regulations of the house. You see, we're talking regulations again. Regulations tend to pull us in line when we go out of line. Classic example. And so it will deter the fly-by-night. It will deter the youngster who thinks that it's just okay to borrow a man's boat, use it, run a tour, and make some money, and to really hijack the industry, undercut the industry with his pricing. All of those things can stop if we regulate the industry properly. It will also allow for greater customer and visitor satisfaction. It could also lead to greater safety and security, because it means that we are constantly monitoring and evaluating the enterprises being offered for service. And then I want to give you 10 possible functions for this regulatory authority for which I propose. And I searched several authorities. I looked at what's happening in different parts of Australia. I looked at what's happening in Canada, in the US, in Jamaica. I look at what's happening in St. Lucia and Barbados. And I found that the most comprehensive one seemed to be what the Kenyan authorities have. And so I have looked at theirs closely. I've looked at our situation, and I have sought to mirror it with these 10 possible functions of a regulatory authority. And I wish to share them. 1, it will formulate guidelines and prescribe measures for sustainable tourism throughout the island. 2, it will regulate tourism activities and services island-wide in accordance with the Tobago tourism strategy. So it's no longer where we have a strategy at this end and people just do what they want, right? We say clean, green, safe, and serene, and people do what they want down on the other side of things, because it will regulate the industry to match the Tobago tourism strategy. Thirdly, it will register, it will license, it will grade all sustainable tourism and tourist-related activities and services, including cottages and private residences engaged in guest house services. Fourthly, it will function to develop and implement, in consultation with relevant stakeholders, criteria for standardization and classification of tourism facilities and services. Fifth, it will develop and regulate in consultation with the divisions responsible for matters relating to education. So the Division of Education, it will develop and regulate in consultation with them tourism and hospitality curriculum, examination, and certification. And let me pause at that function. It amazes me that when I visit Jamaica and I talk to the average cleaner, maid, hotel maid, that I realize that they're all certified. In fact, they are not employed to make the beds in their hotels without a certificate showing that they went to school and learned how to make up bed. And so this regulatory body could also develop curriculum for that sort of educational thrust, so as to ensure that our people are catching up with the rest of the world. Because insurance companies are now demanding that people be certified for working at all levels within the sector. 6, it will develop and implement a code of practice for the tourism sector. 7, it will ensure the development and implementation of high-quality tourism sector for high-quality tourism sector. 8, it will monitor and assess tourist activities and services to enhance continuous improvement and adherence to sound principles and practices of sustainable tourism. 9, it will undertake annually an assessment and audit of tourism activities and services, measures and initiatives at the national level, and it will prepare and publish an annual national tourism or island tourism sector status report in consultation with the line secretary and relevant lead agencies.
Your speaking time has expired. As the mover of the motion, he gets 40 minutes initially, and you can continue in your wrap-up. Members, the question being proposed, whereas the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago approved the formation of separate agencies to treat with tourism, development, and marketing, namely the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited, beginning operations in 2017, and the Trinidad Tourism Limited. And whereas the National Tourism Policy of 2010 is now being revised, and whereas there's a 3-year roadmap developed by the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited, and whereas there's no established national regulatory tourism authority by the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, and current standards require only voluntary compliance, be it resolved that the Tobago House of Assembly, the THA, uses its powers as established in the 5th schedule of the THA Act to develop mandatory regulations for the accommodation, restaurant, tour guide, and other critical services and sectors within the tourism industry. Be it further resolved that the THA establishes a committee of appropriately qualified individuals to construct a THA bill to be subsequently sent to Parliament to establish the Tobago Regulatory Authority to oversee the adherence to regulations that will be set by the THA. Secretary of Tourism.
I thank you, Madam Presiding Officer, for the opportunity to contribute to this debate. It is an absolute pleasure to return after our 2-month break. I wouldn't say much of a rest, as those of us with responsibilities continued working at our various divisions, ensuring that we guide and lead Tobago. And in this, our 3rd year, we do look forward to meaningful discussions. And just like you, Madam Presiding Officer, and my colleague, we join hands and send our thoughts and prayers to all the affected victims on the island of Tobago and also on the sister island, Trinidad, who were affected by the effects of Tropical Storm Karen. And of course, we commend our first responders, and I also take this opportunity to commend the Chief Secretary who led the charge at TEMA from day one to ensure that all was in place. I wish to begin my discourse this afternoon, Madam Presiding Officer, because today we are here coincidentally or intentionally discussing tourism and tourism business on the eve of World Tourism Day that is commemorated on the 27th of September each year, and the Minority Assemblyman did mention that. And if I'm allowed just to digress for 10 seconds to highlight the importance of World Tourism Day, and what this day really aims to do is to foster a sense of awareness amongst the global community on tourism's social, cultural, political, and economic value and the potential that the sector has towards attaining our sustainable development goals whilst addressing the industry challenges. And so challenges, Madam Presiding Officer, of the industry are not Tobago specific. It is indeed a global phenomenon. And so I take this opportunity to wish everyone a happy World Tourism Day 2019. Now, as I get back to the conversation, the motion as piloted by the Minority Assemblyman, and I listened to his opening salvo, and I will admit that his arguments were reasonable in some cases. Now, at the first glimpse of the motion, Madam Presiding Officer, we would say, you know, this is a good motion. Regulatory and mandatory standards are definitely needed. But for us who are required to lead the process, I would say from the onset that we cannot support the motion as it is currently outlined. The intent is a good intent. The reasoning may be on point, but we have to be very careful when we are implementing policies and so on and want to create laws, etc., that we are not reinventing the wheel in the first instance, and those that are going to be impacted or those who are required to adopt and adhere to these measures are on board and have a good understanding of the processes. And that is why, Madam Presiding Officer, we always endeavor to ensure that we are in touch with our stakeholders, that we are consulting our stakeholders and guiding and discussing with them where necessary. Now, before I get into the meat of the motion, I just want to correct the record from the first preamble. And I felt it is very necessary, Madam Presiding Officer, because these motions and everything that we say and do in this House, they are recorded on Hansard. And 10 years from today or 15 years from today, if someone is to pick up the Hansard looking for tourism information, we want to ensure that the correct information is there. And so the Assemblyman, in his first preamble, whereas the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago approved the formation of separate agencies to treat with tourism development and marketing, namely the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited, beginning operations in 2017, and the Trinidad Tourism Limited. And you know, Madam Presiding Officer, I thought we may have said it so many times because we spoke here and we spoke outside of this House that this Tobago Tourism Agency Limited was created by the Executive Council present. As a matter of fact, it was just 2 weeks on assuming office that I, as the Secretary of Tourism, Culture and Transportation, took this note to the Executive Council for consideration and approval for the creation of the Tobago Tourism Agency, and that was even whilst the Tourism Development Company was still in operation, as this was a manifesto promise to the people of Tobago, and it is what the Caribbean was doing, and we felt it necessary to adopt that measure as well. So if I could just correct that record, Madam Presiding Officer. But what that also said, Madam Presiding Officer, very early is that tourism was a priority, and there was a plan for tourism, and we started working that plan. Madam Presiding Officer, in March of 2017, there was a cabinet note that agreed to the dissolution of the former TDC and the establishment of 2 marketing entities, one for Trinidad, and the already created one for Tobago, namely the Tobago Tourism Agency, as well as the Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Regulatory and Licensing Authority. And as I move through the motion, I am very happy that the Minority Assemblyman acknowledged the 3-year roadmap for growth developed and currently being implemented by the Tobago Tourism Agency, which, might I add, is working well. And it does include the mandatory standards that we are speaking of today. Now, Madam Presiding Officer, if I could just speak a little on the regulatory and licensing authority. Now, the establishment of a regulatory authority, as I did indicate, is in fact needed to regulate the country's tourism sector. We need the regulations, we need the standards, we need the guidelines. The Minority Assemblyman spoke about all the reviews that we have been seeing on Facebook. I have seen the reviews as well, and we will agree to that. We do need these standards. But when the Minority Assemblyman is asking for a separate entity in Tobago, we definitely see that as counterproductive, because as I mentioned, the Cabinet approved and there is actually work in train for the establishment of a Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Regulatory and Licensing Authority. As a matter of fact, having these separate regulatory authorities, Madam Presiding Officer, we don't see it as being ideal. And we are not giving up our responsibility. We are not saying that we don't need to do this for Tobago, or we are waiting on Trinidad. But we need something for the twin island Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and that is because industry standards should be consistent with a country and not just specific to any particular geographic location or territory in the region. And we see it as more practical to continue the work through greater collaboration and probably a little greater coercion with the Ministry of Tourism and the relevant agencies to have what we would say the swift operationalization of this regulatory authority, because we know it is important. Now, it is a known fact there are no laws, and whilst we develop and implement all the incentive programs, the sector, the infrastructure remains informal, ad hoc, and unregulated. And it is because of this why the Ministry of Tourism, in an effort to strengthen the existing framework through compulsory licensing, proposed the establishment of this authority. And if I could just outline what the regulatory authority sets out to do, it may be some of the things that the Minority Assemblyman outlined in his 10-point bullet at the end of his presentation, and one, to develop regulations to govern the tourism sector, having responsibility for quality and standards in all segments of tourism and hospitality industry, including accommodation, restaurant, transportations, etc. Two, have legal authority to create and enforce tourism sector regulations, addressing such matters as inspection, licensing, monitoring, tourism operator registration, etc. Three, develop, maintain, and harmonize product quality and service standards for the entire tourism industry and the different sectors. So those are some of the items that the regulatory authority is set out to do. And as I mentioned, the work has already started, and we intend to be the driving forces with the Ministry of Tourism to bring this to fruition for Trinidad and Tobago. Now, Madam Presiding Officer, the standards for the tourism sector are not mandatory. We heard that before. We know that that's a known fact. They are voluntary and founded on policies rather than statutes. But even whilst we are working for the regulatory authority to become fully operational, I just want to highlight some of the activities coming out of TTAL, because TTAL signed an MOU with the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards. The Assemblyman did mention that in passing, but I just want to give the details to develop and implement voluntary standards on the island of Tobago. So what the agency is doing primarily is preparing these stakeholders by encouraging them now to adopt and maintain these voluntary standards as we prepare for the regulatory and mandatory specifications. Because what we cannot run away from is the fact that these mandatory standards, when it is time to implement, it will be a cost to the stakeholders. As a matter of fact, coming out of the consultations, that is one of the things that was mentioned by the stakeholders, the costs to actually get involved. So once they start the process now through all the voluntary processes that are available, what is expected is once the mandatory standards are implemented, they would be well on their way. So we have the Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Industry Certification Program, and that is a national program that is also run by the Ministry of Tourism in Trinidad, but as I indicated, the agency is doing it in collaboration with the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards, and this ensures that operators and service providers in the tourism sector conform to national standards in their operations. Now, through the TTL, there are some operators who have been cooperating and complying with these industry standards, and I take this opportunity to commend these operators and implore others to follow, because whilst the minority assemblyman spoke about all the deficiencies in the sector, I did not hear him once encourage the stakeholders presently to abide by the standards that are voluntary. And so I am taking this opportunity to implore our stakeholders, this is all our business. Tourism is not only the business of us as the policymakers or the leaders. Tourism is the business of all our stakeholders and our operators. Madam Presiding Officer, so the benefits of this TTIC certification, the tourism operators who meet the criteria, they receive an instrument to demonstrate their certification bearing a TTIC logo, as well as they can receive written approval from the Bureau of Standards for any advertisements or publicity relating to the mark prior to publication. We also have our Small Tourism Enterprise project that is called the STEP program. This program delivers significant contributions to the development of the industry by providing a comprehensive approach to fostering innovation, high performance, and profitability, and that is primarily among the small entrepreneurs through cutting-edge and industry-relevant training. We have our Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Accommodation Upgrade Program, and that's aimed at improving the quality of our hotel room stock inventory. It provides a reimbursable grant for approved work done to accommodation facilities in Trinidad and Tobago. TTIC is outlined as the listed prerequisite for properties that intend to access this program. So what this does is basically encourage the properties who are seeking to get that reimbursable grant, they must first be TTIC certified, which means they would be abiding by at least one of the voluntary standards. We also have our Hospitality Assured certification, and that is to ensure that the service quality framework meets the requirements for the European Foundation for Quality Management Excellence model. It is a certification program providing service and business excellence in tourism and hospitality companies. Presently, the Tobago Hospitality and Tourism Institute is the first educational institution in the Caribbean to attain hospitality and hospitality assured certification. Madam Presiding Officer, if I can speak just briefly to some of the collaborative efforts with other agencies. We have the board at the Pigeon Point Heritage Park collaborating with the Division of Food Production, Forestry and Fisheries, and the Division of Quarries, Infrastructure, Quarries and the Environment to ensure that the appropriate standards and enforcement are in place for the management of reef boat operations, which the minority assemblyman did allude to in his contribution, as the management of the reef is under the Division of Food Production and Fisheries, and so we are working with that division. Additionally, just recently, the Division of Health, Wellness and Family Development, the Secretary and myself, we met with representatives from CAFA, and we are also having discussions to develop and maintain certain standards for reporting health-related illnesses. So we are even moving a step further outside of accommodation and operators, and so we are looking at reports for health-related illnesses through a tourism health program. And Madam Presiding Officer, with all the increased focus on brand awareness and brand loyalty in the international market, we want to encourage stakeholders to go beyond the minimum, even if it is just to satisfy the local and voluntary regulations as we work assiduously to enforce and implement the mandatory requirements. I did highlight earlier that we should not invent the wheel, but be drivers, work as drivers of the process to ensure that this regulatory authority is implemented in the shortest time possible. So as the process continues, if I can just give an update as to where the process is presently, the regulatory impact assessment in collaboration with the ministry will be done. This is a tool for ensuring that decisions made regarding the revision or introduction of regulations in an industry or country are not only well executed, but achieve the intended results. So this regulatory impact assessment is going to be conducted before further work is done. And what it does is assist in determining the impacts of regulatory changes, including all the economic, all the legal, and social impacts, which from the consultation, as I indicated, was one of the main areas of concern identified by the stakeholders. Madam Presiding Officer, just before I propose the amendments from this side, I hasten to mention that there, as much as we are speaking about regulations and mandatory specifications, there are no regulations for good old-fashioned customer service, and Tobago brought up C. So we can regulate all we want, we can make whatever mandatory. If we do not adopt the way of life of offering good customer service, we are going nowhere. And we cannot regulate and we cannot mandate people to be courteous and to be kind to both locals and visitors. Madam Presiding Officer, so again, I just wish to reiterate that we encourage our stakeholders to participate in the voluntary exercise, improve your product offerings so that when the legislation gets here, they would already be familiar with the standards and what the industry expects so that the transition is easier. So, Madam Presiding Officer, if I may, I wish to propose the following amendment to the motion. Madam Presiding Officer, I beg to move that the following words be left out of the question, and I will start with the deletions first. In the first paragraph of the preamble, in the proposed motion, from the words approve the formation to Trinidad Tourism Limited. In the first paragraph of the resolution, from the words uses its powers to within the tourism industry. And in the second paragraph of the resolution, the words the THA establishes to that will be set by the THA. So what I just outlined, Madam Presiding Officer, are all the proposed deletions. All the words to be deleted. And the insertions, Madam Presiding Officer, I beg to move that the proposed words be...
Secretary, can you repeat that, the deletions again?
Okay,
please?
so the deletions in the first paragraph of the preamble in the proposed motions. So we are deleting the words approved the formation all the way to the Trinidad Tourism Limited. In the first paragraph of the resolution, we are deleting uses its powers to within the tourism industry. We are deleting that entire line. And in the second paragraph of the resolution, we are deleting from the words the THA establishes to that will be set by the THA. The insertions, Madam Presiding Officer, I beg to move that the proposed words be included in the question. A new first paragraph of the preamble that reads, whereas the Executive Council approved the formation of the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited in February 2017, in the new second paragraph of the preamble, the word "and" is placed before "whereas." In the new second paragraph of the preamble following Trinidad and Tobago, the words "agreed to the dissolution of the Tourism Development Company Limited and the formation of 3 separate entities, including the Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Regulatory and Licensing Authority." In the first paragraph of the resolution following the words "Tobago House of Assembly," the words "continues its collaboration with the Ministry of Tourism in pursuing mandatory regulations through the Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Regulatory and Licensing Authority for the tourism sector." And in the second paragraph of the resolution, following the words "resolved that," the words "this House calls upon all tourism stakeholders to pursue and maintain the current established international industry standards." Madam Presiding Officer, I thank you and I beg to move.
Councillor Faith B. Israel.
Good day, Madam Presiding Officer, members of the Assembly, and to those viewing either in the gallery or via the various media options. And I would like to extend a special greetings, as I saw them just walking in, our visitors from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Welcome. Madam Presiding Officer, today I am really proud of the motion that was raised by my colleague, the member for Palatavir Lansumi Speyside, because this motion shows, Madam Presiding Officer, that those of us on this side are really critically thinking about what Tobago needs to move us from this step, from this level, on to another level, to move us to the point where we can truly say that we are really developing on par with the development that we are seeing in the rest of the world. Madam Presiding Officer, as my colleague already stated, the Tobago House of Assembly Act allows us to do quite a large number of things. And it lists 33, or 32 and a 33rd one that says basically anything else that is necessary to manage the affairs of Tobago. And what we, by bringing this motion, is identifying is the fact that we currently understand the powers that the Tobago House of Assembly has. And while we are moving towards greater autonomy, that we are willing to use as much of the autonomy as we currently have to do the work that's needed for Tobago. It is understood that we have to play catch-up, and it requires quite a bit of work to do the catching up that's necessary. Madam Presiding Officer, I am sure that many Tobagonians, having read this motion, may not have even known that we in the Tobago House of Assembly have the authority to create assembly laws. And I will spend a little bit of time talking about the process of getting that done, because it's not something that we've seen very frequently. As Section 29(1) of the THA Act says, Madam Presiding Officer, and I quote, "In the exercise of its powers under this Act, the Assembly may propose and adopt bills in relation to the matters for which it is responsible under Section 25. And if you look at the Act, Section 25 basically says that the THA is responsible for all of the things in the fifth schedule. In other words, the THA can propose laws that when they follow the process, can propose bills, my error, that when they follow the process as outlined by the THA Act, can become an assembly law on the books of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, after listening to the Secretary with responsibility for tourism, it was confusing and almost disappointing that on one hand, we in Tobago over the last 2.5 or so years have been very proud about our Tobago Tourism Agency, because we thought it was absolutely necessary for us in Tobago to deal with tourism in Tobago, because this is something that's really, really important to us. And we were not willing to wait for whatever happens in Trinidad, because this is extremely important to us. It is therefore disappointing, Madam Presiding Officer, that after having spent almost 2.5 or more than 2.5 years boasting about Tobago taking on control of tourism via this agency, that we would be willing to give back probably the most important part of managing our tourism, which includes the monitoring and the regulation of our tourism, back to the central government, and basically wait for them to do it on their time, even though this is so absolutely critically important for us here in Tobago. We are the ones who said that tourism is going to be one of our main economic drivers, and that we are going to do anything and everything to ensure that that functions. So we cannot just leave it up to the central government of Trinidad and Tobago, who may or may not change in a couple months from now, to just allow them to do it when we have the authority under the Tobago House of Assembly Act to create that regulatory process on our own and not wait for them to do it. Madam Presiding Officer, we understand that this is our business, and as the Assemblyman said, we need to start minding our business. How can these laws be established, Madam Presiding Officer? Well, the THA Act is very clear on the process. Section 29(2) says, and I quote, "Such bills shall be debated in the Assembly in accordance with its standing orders, and if adopted, shall be transmitted by the Chief Secretary to the Secretary to Cabinet with a request for its introduction into the Parliament for enactment into law in accordance with Section 61 of the Constitution," end quotes. As it says, Madam Presiding Officer, we need to do quite a bit of work in Tobago for this to be a reality. It means that we have to do all of the groundwork, and we have to, as my colleague did, look at all of the different options that are available all over the world and figure out, how much of them work for us, which ones work for us, pull the pieces that work for us together, and have that already created, have that already documented. Come here and debate it. And then after it is debated here and passed, we can then hand it over to the Cabinet to have them review and then send it on to the Parliament. Now, the thing about that is the Cabinet has to decide whether it is, in essence, good enough to send it on to the Parliament. But this is how all laws in Trinidad and Tobago are created. The Cabinet needs to figure out whether what was proposed is good enough,
and then send it to the, well, I'm getting to that. Send it to Parliament. Of course, the President needs to assent to it, and then it becomes a law. Yes, this is a lengthy process that requires a lot of work for us to do here on the ground. Because like every other law, it would have to go through that legislative review committee that is a part of any parliament. And we would want to ensure that what is sent from Tobago to Trinidad can withstand the scrutiny of any, and I'm saying any because it should not matter who is in control in Trinidad. But when we do the work on the ground here, and we do the work well enough, then it can withstand the scrutiny of any legislative review committee. So we have to ask ourselves, why has the Tobago House of Assembly, which has been under the hands of the PNM since 2001, why have we not had anything to show that we have been able to successfully go through the process? I did some searching, and I recognize that we did send 2 bills to Trinidad to be sent to the Parliament. They were the Tobago Police Bill and the Marine Sports Bill, and they both got hung up at the Legislative Review Committee. Now, what that shows is that what was sent from Tobago did not meet the necessary background or whatever it was to withstand the scrutiny of that Legislative Review Committee. Now, we don't know, well, I don't know, Madam Presiding Officer, what exactly was wrong. Why didn't it get past that process? And I think it is important for us to understand what happened, and those of us in Tobago, if we honestly believe that the only reason it didn't get passed was because of political reasons, then we needed to then bring it back to Tobago, show Tobago exactly why it was the best possible thing that we could have sent down, and then have us then decide, yes, they're really wicked, or no, they had real legitimate concerns. Madam Presiding Officer, I do not know, and I am hoping that at some point, maybe not in this sitting, we would get some information about what those bills were and exactly what were the comments from the Legislative Review Committee. Because it's important for us to know what are the benchmarks that this committee uses. What would have made it pass? Because we are trying to do this, and we are trying to do this better for the people of Tobago. Work in Tobago, go through the entire process in Tobago, and end up with a document that is debated in this House, that we should not have to send it through Cabinet to have them review it again, to then take it to the President. But that is currently what the process says. But, Madam Presiding Officer, that is not where we are now, so we have to deal with where we are now. But, Madam Presiding Officer, given that we currently are in a situation where we have PNM in Trinidad ruling the Cabinet and the Parliament, and the PNM in Tobago, we would assume that if we do this right now, with the current configuration of the THA and the current configuration of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, that we would be able to do this more swiftly, and we would be able to do this without the kinds of political hindrance that is usually to blame when these things do not work. Just in case you were wondering, whether the THA can just bring any bill, even one that possibly contradicts what the government is doing. That has also been outlined very clearly in the Act. Because Section 29(4) states, a bill adopted by the Assembly shall not seek to abrogate, suspend, repeal, alter, override, or be contrary to any written law of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, or impose any direct or indirect taxation whatsoever. Those are the limitations as currently set out in the Tobago House of Assembly Act. But it's important that we pay attention to one particular word. It says, suspend, repeal, alter, override, or be contrary to any written law of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And that, Madam Presiding Officer, is where we now have an opportunity. Because even though what has been touted is that we are doing it, we are doing it, we are doing it, we are collaborating, we are collaborating, we are collaborating. Central government is doing it, they're doing it, they're doing it. The reality is it has not been done. Therefore, there is currently no written law that they can use to say what we are proposing in our assembly bill contradicts what is already written in the law books of Trinidad and Tobago. So, given everything that was said, this is the absolute perfect time for us to ensure that we do this in Tobago now, before anything else changes, because we are the ones who've been saying that tourism is so absolutely important to us. And we need to ensure that whenever visitors come to Tobago, they get the best quality service that we can provide. As my colleague already outlined, what this would do is really enhance the good work that is already being done by the Tobago Tourism Agency. But as my colleague also outlined, that organization, as much as it wants to do more, it does not have the authority to go in to anybody and say, you cannot do it this way or you must do it that way, because it is not linked to it does not have the authority to do that. In an effort to see how this would work, Madam Presiding Officer, I will just quickly use the Children's Authority as a quick example. We all know that the Children's Authority did not come into being until a couple years ago, when the Children's Authority Act and a couple other child protection related laws were put into place. Now in Trinidad and Tobago, all children's homes, what we used to call detention centers, nurseries, daycares, and so forth, are supposed to be licensed according to the laws that are now outlined. The Children's Authority is the entity that all of those organizations would send their information to. The Children's Authority would review the information, visit, and so forth, and then say, yes, you are licensed to do these things. You are now allowed to continue working. In essence, that is what the Tobago Regulatory Authority, or whatever it's called, would do as it relates to tourism. There are various regulations that accompany the laws that govern how the Children's Authority works, and we would have to do the same thing because the regulations for our bed and breakfast may not be the same as the regulations for a huge 100, 200 room hotel and so forth. Of course, Madam Presiding Officer, the proposed law would then give a deadline that allows all of the tourism-related stakeholders who are currently operating, they would be given a deadline for when they would need to come into compliance. The law, as it relates to Children's Authority, was that 3 months after the Children's Authority came into being,
all of those children's homes and nurseries and so forth. They had 3 months to register, 3 months to apply, and they have been working with the Children's Authority to ensure that they are compliant. So that is something that we can employ here. So those who are already functioning, you will not be shut down, but you will be given time to come up to scratch as long as you follow the laws. Madam Presiding Officer, this is a very good opportunity for the THA to really show its commitment to working very closely with the private sector. And as the Secretary with responsibility for tourism spoke about, we currently have the Tourism Accommodation Upgrade Project. But of course, this is managed via the Ministry of Tourism in Trinidad. And from talking to the stakeholders on the ground, the tourism stakeholders, what this project does is allows you to be reimbursed for monies that you've already spent to upgrade your facility. What we are getting on the ground is that many of the tourism stakeholders in Tobago, because of everything that has been happening in Trinidad and Tobago for the last couple of years, and particularly because our inter-island transportation system really has not worked the way it should for the last couple of years, and because we have all recorded the drastic reduction in number of arrivals over the last couple of years, they simply do not have the money to spend up front to then get reimbursed. So even though it may be a relatively simple process, if they don't have the money to first spend to then be reimbursed, then that program does not help them. We have an opportunity here to use a similar program where instead of a reimbursement, because a reimbursement is really a grant after the fact, we can work closely with those who are already functioning now to give them the grant in front and work with them to ensure that they come up to speed. Because, Madam Presiding Officer, we understand that the role of government is to ensure that ensure that there is a smooth pathway for the private sector to flourish. Speaking about the private sector, Madam Presiding Officer, this is also a perfect opportunity for our young Tobagonians who may have their degrees in tourism-related activities, may have architectural design-related degrees, may have decorating and landscaping and all of those kinds of degrees. This is an opportunity for them to start, for example, providing consulting services to the members who are tourism stakeholders. Because even though those who are tourism stakeholders may not know the process or may not want to be bogged down by the nitty-gritty of getting to being compliant if this process is done correctly, we now have an opportunity for consultants to be hired by these tourism stakeholders. And those consultants would work very closely with them to ensure that their business, whether it's a bed and breakfast, whether it's a restaurant, whatever it is, comes up to compliant. It is as simple or as complicated as those people who help us sign up immigration application forms. Yes, we have to do it if we want to go to the US Embassy or whatever, but there are people who are just willing to lend you their services so that they can go through all of the checks and ticks and so forth, so that you don't have to spend your time doing that. That way, the business owners could stick to what they want to do, which is get people to the island, ensure that their services is top class and so forth. They could stick to that while allowing these young professionals to create, in essence, a new income stream on the island. And those who are now thinking about going into the bed and breakfast or the whatever it is, they can also tap into those people, to those young professionals and say, hey, I'm thinking about building a hotel, but I know we have these rules that we need to follow. We have these regulations that we need to follow. Help us walk through to ensure that by the time we are done, we are up to code. Madam Presiding Officer, these are just some of the ideas that we have thought about. As my colleagues stated in the original motion, the idea is for us to sit down with the industry professionals and ensure that the bill that comes from Tobago, because we simply do not have the time and we do not have the luxury to wait for the government of Trinidad and Tobago to do it for us. Let us use the resources that we currently have on the ground. Let us use the skills that we have. Let us use the capabilities that we have on the ground to ensure that we list, to ensure that we create these regulations, to ensure that we create the monitoring system, put together that bill, ensure that it has all of the checks and balances, ensure that we cross all of our T's and dot all of our I's, so that when it gets to the cabinet in Trinidad, regardless of who is in power in Trinidad, it will meet the basic benchmarks, and let us not sit here and wait. We do not have the luxury of sitting and waiting for anyone else to do it for us. We are very proud of our Tobago Tourism Agency. Let us give them the teeth to do their work and to function. Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Deputy Presiding Officer.
Presiding Officer, for the opportunity to contribute to this motion before us today. Of course, it has been a very short 2-month break, and therefore, as I try to get back into my usual stride, I won't be very long today, because I think this process is one that has been ongoing for some time, and therefore I want to focus more or less on the legal process that is expected to take place, or that should take place, to give life to this important proposal, Madam Presiding Officer. But before I get into the meat of this contribution, I want to as well firstly thank Almighty God for the fact that Tobago and the people of Tobago were spared any significant damage by the tropical storm Karen that recently passed. And let me also congratulate all the agencies, of course, the TEMA, led by Mr. Alan Stewart, and of course the Honorable Chief Secretary, the Trinidad and Tobago Fire Service, the Police Service, all those entities that contributed to ensuring, even Tech, that ensured that power was restored throughout Tobago, although in some cases not as fast as we would have liked, especially in the east of Tobago. But I think all the various agencies did tremendously well to ensure that, normalcy returned to the people of Tobago in a reasonable space of time. But I want to also single out some private citizens, some individuals from the constituency of the member for Palataville, Lansam, Speyside, Mr. Glennon Sharp, a good friend of mine, another individual by the name of Jesse James, and other members of that community that volunteered their time and their effort to ensure that the roadways in that part of Tobago was clear of fallen trees. And interestingly, as I sat there and I recalled that moment, because I saw it, of course, on videos circulating on WhatsApp, and then I had a short conversation with Mr. Sharp via telephone. And I said to myself, those are things that you can't regulate. It's either you're good or you're bad. It's either you're willing to, be self-reliant, or you're dependent. So I want to congratulate those Tobagonians and all Tobagonians, for demonstrating the kind of resilience and the kind of self-reliance that Tobagonians have been known for many years. So we are here and we are talking about about regulating the tourism industry. And I want to congratulate the member for Palato Bay Lansom and Speyside. It is not often that I congratulate those on the minority side. But I think in the absence of the minority leader, you know, it's a good time to offer congratulations. I think your contribution was very exhaustive, very lucid. And I believe all of us in this house and all of us throughout Tobago, you know, must in fact support the need for regulation and for the applicable laws and the applicable rules that will govern our tourism industry. As a matter of fact, I would like to suggest that we are years behind in that we should have gone this way some time ago, Madam Presiding Officer. And therefore, I want to speak a bit to the process, and I want to start with this notion that the Tobago House of Assembly somehow has powers of lawmaking in Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm reminded of something that former President Carmona said. You know, powers they think I have, I do not. But powers they don't think I have. And I suspect that some persons in this space, some persons around this horseshoe, tend to believe that Tobago has powers that in reality we do not have, Madam Presiding Officer. Because when you carefully examine the THE Act of 1996, and I was not old enough in 1996 to, you know, understand fully what was happening. At that point in time, I was, 9 years of age? But when you examine the Act, and many of us would go around and say the THE has the power to make laws, my understanding of the Act, Madam Presiding Officer, is that the Tobago House of Assembly does not have the power to make any law. As a matter of fact, the only lawmaking body in Trinidad and Tobago is the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, I will even suggest that Section 29 of the THA Act, where it says, and I'm going to read it, although it was read before, but there's a specific part of the Act that I will want to zero in on to support my arguments. And of course, it says, 29(1), in the exercise of its powers under this Act, the Assembly may propose and adopt bills in relation to the matters for which it is responsible under Section 25. Such bills shall be debated in the Assembly in accordance with its standing orders, and if adopted, shall be transmitted by the Chief Secretary to the Secretary to the Cabinet with a request for its introduction into Parliament for enactment into law in accordance with Section 61 of the Constitution. But there's another part, 29(4), and of course this will be very relevant to what we are discussing today, Madam Presiding Officer. And it says a bill adopted by the Assembly shall not seek to abrogate, suspend, repeal, alter, override, or be contrary to any written law of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And this is the interesting part. Or impose any direct or indirect taxations whatsoever. So this means that the Assembly, firstly, does not necessarily have the power to make laws in Trinidad and Tobago. We could begin the process, we could debate bills, and we could send them to the Cabinet, and then Cabinet will in fact decide if it goes to Parliament. And you know, I will even go as far as making what might consider to be a controversial statement by suggesting that this proposal or this part of the Act, if you ask me, is in fact nonsensical. And when you look at the history, we have submitted, as the minority councillor said, 2 bills before Cabinet, and we all know where they are at this point in time. And therefore, I want to once again call for the people of Tobago, of course, all of us within this room, and those on the outside, and even Tobagonians in Trinidad, and the people of Trinidad and Tobago, to really afford Tobagonians the opportunity to really govern ourselves here in Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore the question is, how can we move forward with this proposal, which seeks to ensure that here in Tobago, that we implement some sort of regulatory framework to ensure that our tourism industry is properly regulated. And I want to say to all of us, and for all of you who know me, would know that I grew up in a fishing village called Buku. And of course, there are a number of tourism-related businesses operating in that community, from guest houses to what you might consider small hotels, restaurants, jet ski operators, reef boat operators, and other tour operators. As a matter of fact, Madam Presiding Officer, I'm the owner of a boat. And therefore, I understand the need for us to regulate the industry. I understand the need for us to ensure that when our visitors come to our shores, that they receive quality service, and of course a product that is in keeping with international standards, Madam Presiding Officer. So there is no question about whether we should have regulations or not. But the question really is, how should this be done? And of course, the proposal coming from the minority is that the Tobago House of Assembly should engage itself in another process where we create a bill, of course, bringing a committee together and all of that, and engage in another process, sending the bill before the cabinet, expecting the bill to go to Parliament and to somehow become a Tobago law. And I'm saying that is almost a parallel process to what we already have in place, with members of the cabinet driving a process where a Trinidad and Tobago regulatory authority will be established to ensure that the entire tourism industry in both Trinidad and Tobago is regulated, Madam Presiding Officer. So as the Secretary for Tourism said, there is no need for us to reinvent the wheel. There is no need for us to establish a parallel process, especially if that process would encourage us to repeat what I consider to be mistakes of the past. Because let's be realistic. Because, of course, we like to look at the law, the letter of the law, and we like to look at things on paper. And oftentimes, we don't look at the practicality of what we are proposing. And I'm saying that when you examine the agenda of the Parliament, you realize that the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, there is a particular atmosphere. When you look at the kind of bills, anti-money laundering, FATCA, explain your wealth, anti-gang legislation, all kinds of legislation, of course, geared towards dealing with crime and criminality, and of course, corruption, Madam Presiding Officer. And that to me is understandable, because you have a situation where, as far as the Parliament is concerned, and as far as the people of Trinidad and Tobago is concerned, this is the major thing on the agenda: crime. The fact that the murder rate continues to be significantly high. The fact that corruption has been a problem in this country for many years. And of course, that is the atmosphere, and that is the focus of the central government at this point in time. And therefore, we expect as an assembly that we should be able to send bills to the cabinet. They must put off their agenda, look at this Tobago bill, and of course make a decision as to whether the bill should go to Parliament or not. And of course, if it gets to Parliament, the Parliament must then debate and decide if they're going to pass this Tobago specific bill. And that is why, Madam Presiding Officer, I am tremendously in love with the Tobago Self-Government Constitutional Amendment Bill. I may not have gotten the phrase in the correct order, which proposes, Madam Presiding Officer, that there in fact be a Tobago Legislature, which comprises of the President, a proposed People's House, and of course, the Assembly with some minor changes. I think one assemblyman and one additional councillor or something of this sort. And I'm saying that is in fact true autonomy, where the people of Tobago, where the elected representatives of Tobago can in fact debate bills, can in fact pass laws, without it having to go to another body in Trinidad called the Cabinet, or without it having to go to the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm saying, had we been operating in that context, then it would have made sense, Madam Presiding Officer, for us to be considering the approach that the minority is bringing before us today. But in the present context, given the reality of the THA Act, and I know sometimes those on the minority side will make suggestions for us to repeal and strike down laws, especially when members on their side get into trouble with particular laws. But I will never suggest, Madam Presiding Officer, that we strike down the THA Act in its present form. Of course, I'm all for internal self-government, and therefore I await the day when the people of Tobago will be afforded their deserved right to self-determination, Madam Presiding Officer. And I want to suggest to us that that will not be in the too distant future, Madam Presiding Officer. So, of course, any regulatory framework will in fact include licensing, Madam Presiding Officer. And I would want to suspect that any framework which includes licensing should in fact have licensing fees attached. As a matter of fact, like the member for Palatovia Lansing Speyside, I also looked at other frameworks throughout the world. And I looked at our very close neighbors, Barbados' context. And of course, they have a Barbados Tourism Authority. And that body has significant responsibilities from promotion, marketing, and they also have responsibility for regulating. And of course, we have taken a different approach where we already have an agency with responsibility for marketing and promotion. And of course, we're now looking at how we regulate the industry. But you have a situation where in Barbados, every single tourism-related business, hotel, guest house, restaurants, tour operators, they must in fact be licensed. And of course, in order to do that, they must meet certain requirements, and the Tourism Authority has the powers to draft and implement regulations accordingly. And of course, these powers are given to them through an Act of Parliament, Madam Presiding Officer. And of course, after a prescribed period of time, all these entities must ensure that they renew their licenses. And that comes with a fee, Madam Presiding Officer. As a matter of fact, some may consider it a tax, a form of taxation. Some may want to consider it as taxation indirectly. And therefore, the question begs, can the Tobago House of Assembly, in its current form, implement or propose any legislation which seeks to tax, whether directly or indirectly, Madam Presiding Officer? And therefore, that is one of the challenges that I have with the current motion before us, Madam Presiding Officer. But not only that, because you can't have regulation, in my opinion, without consequences. And I'm saying those consequences must, in fact, be accompanied by fines or jail term. So when you look at Section 25 of the Barbados Tourism Authority Act, and I want to read it. Because there are two situations in which you could be fined or you could end up in prison. So 26(1), no person shall manage any tourist accommodation, tourism enterprises, tourism product, or operate as a tourism service provider unless that person first applies to the authority for and obtains a license issued under this act. Section 26. And of course, if you flout that law, you are likely to be fined up to $10,000 or face 1 year imprisonment. And the other offense, Madam Presiding Officer, can be found can't find the exact section and I wouldn't look for it. But it has to do, Madam Presiding Officer, with refusing to give access to agents of the authority so they can inspect not only your property, but also your books, your policies, and whatever other documentations you have with relation to the management and the operations of your property or your tourism-related business, Madam Presiding Officer. And if you flout that law, or you refuse to obey that law, Madam Presiding Officer, you can in fact face a fine of up to $1,000, and I believe they're speaking Bajan dollars, or up to 6 months in prison, Madam Presiding Officer. So again, you have the authority, you have the agency with the, not the agency, the Barbados Tourism Authority, who has the responsibility to promote, market, and establish regulations. And within the law, there's a prescription where persons failing to observe those two areas of the law, failing to be licensed firstly, which carries the larger penalty, and of course failing to allow agents of the authority access to your premises or access to your boat or whatever, which carries a smaller penalty, Madam Presiding Officer. So I'm saying when it comes to regulation, the consequences are far-reaching. It should involve licensing, and I'm saying there should be some fees attached to that, Madam Presiding Officer. And I'm saying given those ramifications, the Tobago House of Assembly, in its present context, governed under the present THA Act, does not have the authority, Madam Presiding Officer, to engage in establishment of such legislation. And therefore the question is, would it not be a better course of action to continue to collaborate with the central government on a process that began since March 2017 as we move along towards, of course, the first proposal was to establish 2 agencies on each island with responsibility for promoting and marketing the 2 unique products of the 2 islands, Madam Presiding Officer. And of course, following that, the need to establish a regulatory agency, Madam Presiding Officer. So I'm saying we on this side, we are saying that the better approach is to continue along this path, support the ministry, collaborate with the ministry, and in some cases, Madam Presiding Officer, apply pressure. Because I'm saying, given the unique context, Tobago and Trinidad, national issues versus local issues, and I'm saying we ought to be realistic. Because one of the reasons we are in this position today is that there was never really a need for us to focus on tourism as a country, Madam Presiding Officer. It might have been a want, but it wasn't a need. And therefore, when you look at destinations like Barbados, St. Lucia, Jamaica, who didn't have oil, who didn't have other things to depend on, for them it was a need. And therefore, now that we are faced with circumstances which warrants Tobago to produce more and do more, not just in terms of tourism, but also agriculture and maybe renewable energy and other sectors in which we could find ourselves in, we must ensure that we take the necessary action not only as leaders, but as a people on this island to ensure we play a greater role in the economic development and advancement of this country, Madam Presiding Officer. So I'm saying, yes, we need regulation. We must regulate the tourism industry. And we must ensure that persons are forced to abide by those regulations, Madam Presiding Officer. But I'm saying as well that the better approach is to continue collaboration with the central government to ensure that we have this done in the very near future, Madam Presiding Officer. But the reality is, as I close, as I said, I will not be very long. The reality is that there are some things that we can do and should in fact be doing now, Madam Presiding Officer. Because I'm saying there are some things that should never have to be regulated. And of course, within our society, you have different kinds of people. You have good, you have bad people. And I wouldn't say ugly because I don't want anybody to suggest that the assemblyman from Bukom Unpleasant refer to anybody as ugly, Madam Presiding Officer. But I'm simply saying you have good people who will ensure that they put their best foot forward, regulations or not, who will ensure that if they have a reef boat or any kind of boat, that they will observe the rule of law, and therefore if your boat could safely carry 20, you wouldn't put 50 on it for a few dollars more, because you understand the harm that it could do to our tourism industry. And not only the tourism industry, but you understand the potential danger that you are bringing to the lives of those that you serve. And I'm saying there are persons who will understand that. There are persons who will understand that without effective customer service, you could never, in fact, have a successful business. There are those who will understand that in order for a business to be maintained and in order for a business to continue to be relevant and sustainable, that you have to reinvest some of your profits in its upkeep and upgrades. But the reality, Madam Presiding Officer, is that there are some of us who are not like-minded. And therefore, I want to urge all of us, and I want to speak specifically to the local tourists, those coming from Trinidad, or even those here in Tobago, because we have a responsibility, and I'm going to tell you about the responsibility just now. Because I'm saying we will do our work. We will continue to ensure that we take the necessary steps to bring these proposals to fruition. But the reality is, at this point in time, we don't have the regulations in place, apart from the voluntary ones, of course. The reality at this point in time is that tomorrow, if you decide to go rent a jet ski or go on a boat tour, etc., the reality is that those operators are not bound to any legal requirements as it relates to tourism-based regulations. And therefore, I'm saying it is up to us to come up with some of our own regulations, Madam Presiding Officer. And therefore, in the meantime, I am calling on the people of Tobago to be selective in their choices. Because the reality is, when you go to buy food and the food tastes good, you go back and you buy it. And if the food don't taste good, you look for somewhere else. And I'm saying that must apply to the tourism sector. I'm saying we must not allow persons to destroy our tourism industry. So I liked, as the member from the minority side, member for Palatoville and some SP side, I like the fact that he read onto the record a particular Facebook review. But but I was disappointed that he didn't call a name, and that's his choice. Because I'm saying there must come a time where we must begin to expose and reject the folly of some of our stakeholders here in Tobago. I'm saying there must come a time where we must refuse to accept mediocre service. We must refuse to accept dangerous products and services offered as tourism products and services. We must refuse to board overload boats just because it costs $100 or $50 less than the standard price. We must refuse to put our lives at risk. And I'm saying, and the touts is another story, but I'm saying we have a situation. I and all experience it from time to time, and I'm going to tell you this story. Driving into Pigeon Point, not interested in any reef boat tour, but I was going to get some crab and dumpling. And as I stopped at Strawberry Junction to make the right, 4 young men ran up on my vehicle. And I know they were touts, so I was not necessarily afraid that I was going to be robbed or anything like that. But I'm saying you can imagine one of our visitors being unaware of that situation. And as you stop to make a right turn into what is supposed to be one of Tobago's hallmark locations, 3 or 4 young men, not dressed professionally, not conducting themselves professionally, run up on your vehicle, start knocking on your glass. You don't know if to screw down the glass. You don't know if to open the door and run outside. You don't know what to do. And I'm saying 200 meters away from that, we have a Crown Point police station. And therefore the question has to be asked, is it that we are so helpless in that situation that the police cannot find any laws to enforce in that circumstance? Or the very members of that sector, the very reef boat owners and operators, if they can't do anything about that untenable situation, Madam Presiding Officer. So the point I'm trying to make is that all of us have a responsibility to ensure that the tourism industry here in Tobago continues to grow, continues to flourish, but is also protected from bad persons and bad characters who are intent on destroying the industry just for a few dollars more, Madam Presiding Officer. And I'm saying all of us have that responsibility. Because I'm saying there are others operating in the same context. But they understand that if you're buying a boat and your boat could seat 15, don't carry 20. They understand that if your boat could seat 10, you should have 10 life jackets on board. They understand that if you have a guest house.
The mayor's speaking time is up.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I beg that the members' time be extended by a further 10 minutes.
Members, the question is that the members' time be extended by a further 10 minutes. All in favor? Any against? Member, your time has been extended by a further 10 minutes.
I was supposed to be short, but sometimes you get carried away. So I'm saying, Madam Presiding Officer, we have a responsibility as well to ensure that certain characters do not negatively or adversely continue to adversely impact our tourism industry here in Tobago. Because I'm saying there are others who, even without regulations, they ensure that they do what they are supposed to do. Those with properties who ensure that, come on, your car have a pillow, the pillow is supposed to be white, or the pillow walnut, like this wood, Madam Presiding Officer. Your car have a sheet that's supposed to be a white sheet, but it polka dot in brown and white, Madam Presiding Officer. And I'm saying there are some who understand that. Simple things. They need to change your sheets from time to time. They need to change your linen and other things from time to time. They need to ensure that your premises are safe, whether it's a step with a broken tile or things like these. I'm saying there are those who understand that. because I've been to some properties, some of them right in Buko, Madam Presiding Officer, and I'm saying they are kept at an acceptable standard. So all of us must do our part, Madam Presiding Officer. And of course, as I close, I want to read the final two parts of the proposed amended motion, where it says, firstly, be it resolved that the Tobago House of Assembly continues its collaboration with the Ministry of Tourism in pursuing mandatory regulations through the Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Regulatory and Licensing Authority for the tourism sector. And last but not least, be it further resolved that this House call upon all tourism stakeholders to pursue and maintain the current established international industry standards, Madam Presiding Officer. So once again, I want to also congratulate every tourism stakeholder, car rental owners, boat tour operators, especially those in Speyside. I saw a Facebook post recently where this particular reef boat operator seemed to be well prepared, proper uniforms, boat looking in good condition, etc. And I want to congratulate those who go the extra mile to ensure that what they are offering reflects the tourism industry that we want to establish here in Tobago, Madam Presiding Officer. And I'm saying even those who go the extra mile of educating themselves, especially the reef tour operators, so that those who experience those tours can in fact come back to land or come back to shore, knowing a thing or two about the reef or the mangrove and the corals, and therefore not just being exposed to ganja smoke and hard pong, as was demonstrated in the review previously mentioned earlier by the member for Palo Verde Lansom in Speyside. So I'm saying again, the responsibility is all of us. And even as we move towards establishing much needed regulations, in the meantime, there are approaches, there are responsibilities that we as Tobagonians must ensure that we fulfill, not only to some tourism industry, but to ourselves as a people, Madam Presiding Officer. I thank you.
Member for Palatuvia, Lansome, Speyside.
Thank you very much, Madam Presiding Officer. And thanks to all who presented. I wish to wind up the debate by putting two words before the House, two words beginning with the letter T. The first word is trust, and the second word is time. Trust and time. And you know, if you should ask my significant other if I have trust, if I'm a trustworthy person and if I'm a trusting person, she will answer in the affirmative. If you ask her if I have patience, she will also answer in the affirmative. But I have found, Madam Presiding Officer, when it comes to matters of Tobago affairs, trust and time are two things, two qualities I struggle with. And I struggle with them because I see a Tobago that could be doing so much better than it is doing. And for some reason, we keep hitting the mediocre mark and not hitting our fullest potential. In fact, I sometimes reference the heritage symbol, forever pregnant, but never giving birth. And I wonder if that isn't a reflection of who we are. Always pregnant with all of these possibilities, but just unable to give birth to all of these possibilities that we are capable of. And as I wind up, you'll understand why I cite the words trust and time. I wish to begin by referencing the presentation of Councillor Dr. B. Israel, who, like the Assemblyman for Boku Mount Pleasant, went through the bill, because I'm proposing that a THA bill be subsequently structured. And I wish to advise the member for Boku Mount Pleasant that at no point the motion, nor those on this side, assumed that it will be easy, nor at any point we assume that we could come here and just make the law. We know we can't. We know what the process is. And so Councillor Dr. B. Israel rightfully went through lengthily what the steps are, but also she raised a valid point I didn't look at before, which is that with regulations and a regulated industry, it will open up the market for other industries. And that there will be young professionals who will need to guide some of the folks within our tourism sector to be prepared for these regulations. Because let's face it, we have a tourism sector where several of our practitioners have been doing it by trial and error, not by any sense of formal training. I know many who have establishments for years and struggle to get their books done right, but they have successful businesses running. And so it means that should there be regulations, as Councillor Dr. Faith B. Israel pointed out, there will be a need for the young, the bright, those who are trained in some of these areas to provide the consultancy and to provide the training to assist. So that's an additional benefit. Then I listened to the presentation of the Assemblyman for Boku Mount Pleasant. And I must say, Madam Presiding Officer, I see the Assemblyman, since I have arrived to this house, he is learning quite quickly how to be the classic dresser. So I see we are wearing identical shade of pink shirt and gray patterned blazers. So I see he's picking up some skills, and I'm happy to rub off positively on him in that regard. But after listening to the Assemblyman, I need to ask, why don't we see value in standing in a position of advocacy? Yes, I understand it is hard, near impossible, but there is significant value in trying and failing than failing to try. And he made it clear. In fact, he was perhaps the clearest of those on the other side in pointing out, look, we agree in principle on all of the things established, but we disagree on the process. And for me, I find it hard for you to tell me that the same central government that is taking 10 years to do a national policy and taking 1 million years, and that's a hyperbole, taking 1 million years to do everything, is somehow trustworthy enough and dependable enough that we should wait it out with them and hope that it gets done. What if it never gets done? What if 10 years from now it still isn't done? We will still be waiting, and that's why I raise the word trust, because I don't have that level of trust in the central government at all. I hope that isn't seditious, Madam Presiding Officer, but that's my honest feelings about the central government. And so, in a position where the central government, time and time again, without regard for who sits at the executive, at the cabinet, has failed Tobago on many of these issues, I ask, when will Tobago issues be priority? Just like crime, just like corruption and all the other bills they have before the parliament. When will our issues be priority? And the Assemblyman for Boku Mount Pleasant also inherently admitted that his party would have oversold its competitive advantage in the politics of Tobago. Because its competitive advantage was, well, if it's PNM in Trinidad and PNM in Tobago, things go run smooth. And then the Prime Minister is, when are we on? So it's a phone call. They make it sound like you could pick up the phone, call up the Prime Minister and say, hey, I send this down to your desk, ensure that it works out, ensure it gets to Parliament and it gets priority. And you say, well, it's my brothers and sisters from Tobago, you get top priority. But clearly, having listened to those opposite, that is not the case. That if we should go the way the original motion is framed, then we will have to beg and beseech and plead and maybe cry, and it will still not get done, although it's PNM in Trinidad and PNM in Tobago. So evidently, those opposite, and I hope Tobagonians have listened, and understand finally that those opposite have oversold its competitive advantage. And what they told us was a competitive advantage in the politics of the island was really a phantom, a ghost. And then I get to the Secretary of Tourism, Culture and Transportation. And the councillor, like myself, highlighted some of the efforts. And she raised the amendments to the motion, which basically requires that those of us in the THA trust the process and trust the central government to get it done, and trust that it will happen within a timely manner so that we will benefit. Without regard for the fact that in the preamble that was changed, we made it a point to highlight that, look, it's not the cabinet tell we to do this. We approve this before the cabinet say we should have separate agencies. So we're touting on one hand this autonomy and this big boy behavior and the ability as the executive council to be forward-thinking, to be novel, to stand on our own. And then on the other hand, we come and we say, well, we really can't do this on our own, you know. We really wish that Trinidad will get its act together and we'll kind of work with them and hope it gets done. To me, that is not a recipe for success. We should follow through. And so I wish to tell the good secretary that while I agree with all the amendments in the preamble, I have issues with the amendments in the resolution. Because as I said, when it comes to the central government, I have issues with trust and time when it comes to them. And so I wish to ask some questions. And I know I'm wrapping up, Madam Presiding Officer, but I will more than welcome any interruption on points of clarity if it's allowed, because I am sure the member for Backlet Mount St. George will agree with me that our decision-making should always be data-driven. And so there are some questions I wish to ask. If you want me to trust the process that is there now, I will love to have answers to these questions. In fact, they should have been answered. I shouldn't have to ask them. One of those questions will be, can we be told how many stakeholders in Tobago have already been certified via the TTIC that is being implemented in Tobago by TTAL? How many stakeholders have been certified? And that will tell me whether or not we could allow to wait the time out with Trinidad, because Tobagoans are anxiously getting certified, notwithstanding the voluntary nature of it, or whether there should be haste. I would also like to know when last the Pigeon Point Heritage Park Committee had a joint meeting with those in fisheries. When last did they actually sit and meet? Because plenty of these things are supposed to happen on paper. But if you dig deep, as I've been digging into this issue, you will realize a lot has not been happening as it should be happening. And as for the hospitality assurance at THDI, to date, what's the enrollment in that program? Because those figures will tell me whether Tobagoans are actively pursuing the voluntary measures and we could afford to sit back and wait on Trinidad because our people are getting their acts together. Then we were told that, work is in train. with the national regulatory body that's since 2017 that process started. Work being in train is actually not a substantial scientific expression. Can that progress be quantified? Can we be told how far along the progress is? How long again we have to wait? And that is it, Madam Presiding Officer. If you want me to sit and trust that Trinidad will get its act together and we will have a national framework, then at least you should have said to me, look, the process is at this point. You wouldn't have known. You missed it. But we're at this point right now. We estimate it will take X amount of time to get done. We anticipate that a law will be brought before Parliament around this time or this legislative quarter. And so we have real measurable things on which we can trust. Because you see, trust could never happen blindly. People who trust blindly will always end up in problems. When you want to apply trust, you want some evidence, some proof, something measurable, something tangible that you could hold up and say, this gives me reason to trust this person. And so, if the argument from those opposite is, we should trust the central government with getting this done, then all of these data items I'm asking for now, I shouldn't have had to ask for them in the winding up. They should have been told to us as a way of convincing us, yes, we can trust the central government on this one thing. Maybe we couldn't trust them on the other things in the past. But you see this, we could trust them on this. And we have not had that. And to be honest, Madam Presiding Officer, most times when we bring the motions and the motions are debated and changed, and we just abstain at the end, it's not that we no longer disagree with the principles behind the motion, but it's because we feel so strongly that we feel as if there is a deliberate attempt to just water down motions so that we can ultimately water down our responsibilities at the Executive Council. And that should not be. We shouldn't be attenuating very important motions like this, just so that we could rock back and wait on Trinidad to get it done. I wish to say, Madam Presiding Officer, that, and it was mentioned throughout the debate, that I wish, like all of us around this horseshoe, that this body was a legislative body and today we were debating the actual law. I wish that was the case. I wish I could snap my fingers and we get to that point. But of course, if I snap my fingers forward to the future, many of those opposite will not be sitting in the chamber with me as well. I just need to point that out. But I wish I could snap my fingers and take us to that place. But it doesn't quite work that way. And so the question is, should we sit and wait? When the vote is called, it will be a vote of whether we sit and wait on Trinidad to get it done in whatever time Trinidad feels like doing it, because tourism is still not a priority for Trinidad. Trinidad had their own agency that they gave up 20-something million to start up. We started up ours with about, what, 1-2 million, thereabout, and had about 28 million for operation. They had 20-something million to start, and then a further 40-something for operation, and it's a sort of bacchanal and chaos and who resigning and who get fired and all kind of madness. As far as I'm concerned, waiting on Trinidad is a dangerous strategy for getting this done. Because there is another word beginning with T that you have to pay attention to, which is time. We do not have 10 more years for this to happen. The Assemblyman for Boku Mount Pleasant pointed out that we are behind time. We are years behind time. And I agree with the goodly Assemblyman. We are years behind time. And so we don't have 10 years to wait, as we have been waiting 10 years, almost 10 years, on a national policy. And so the votes will be, do I wait on Trinidad, or do I stand up and advocate? We may advocate and not win. We may advocate and the bill doesn't go anywhere. We may advocate and they still shut us down and not make us a priority. But at least we could say to those who have sent us to this place, look, we have tried. Measure us based on what we have tried. But I don't want us to go back to the electorate and say to them, well, we were waiting on Trinidad to get it done, and you know they were having consultations, and they reached this point and that point, and we're waiting. That is not an acceptable answer for why we cannot get this done post-haste. And so I basically know which way the vote will go. And I know the motion will ultimately go for that which is amended. The numbers are stacked against me today. However, I do pray, Madam Presiding Officer, that this one thing actually works out. I do pray that this one time Trinidad does it right with us and gets the thing done on time. I do pray that. And I wish to end by saying to proprietors within the tourism service sector that your struggles have not gone unnoticed. You have been trying, some of you have been failing, some have been successful, but your struggles generally have not gone unnoticed. I wish to say to you that the matters of a regulated industry is a hard pill for you to swallow. And I know, and the Secretary spoke about it, how the stakeholders feel and the cost to them. And one of the things I wanted to caution her about is that many of the stakeholders will delay this for as long as possible because they don't want nobody regulate them at all. They want to do what they want. That's the reality. But the thing about regulations is that sometimes it's not about what you want, but how it must be. Because as I started with the reference to my grandparents' house, they made the regulations about how we treated visitors. And as much as children, as grandchildren, we wish we could frown in disapproval. We wish we could make them jostle with us for piece of meat in the pot. We wish we could tell them, those come here to sleep, go back home in your place. We wish we could be rude. My grandparents would never have allowed it because the regulations were set in the household. And so, for that reason, regulations must be a bitter pill that we just all have to swallow. Some it will cost more than others, but we all must have it done. If we don't, then we will have chaos. What do we prefer, chaos or community? Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer.
The Secretary of Tourism, Culture and Transportation moved a motion. Do we have a seconder?
Madam Presiding Officer, I beg to second the amendments to the motion.
Members, before I put the question, we do have an amendment before us. I would read first the deletions and then the insertion for each paragraph. In the first paragraph of the preamble, in the proposed motion, from the words, approve the formation to the Trinidad Tourism Limited, will be deleted. In the first, in the first paragraph of the resolution, from the words, uses its powers to within the tourism industry, will be deleted. In the second paragraph of the resolution, from the words, the THA establishes, to that will be set out by the THA, will be deleted. All in favor of the deletions? Aye. Any against? Any abstaining? The insertions, for the insertions, you have the proposed words be included in the question. A new first paragraph of the preamble that reads, Whereas the Executive Council approved the formation of the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited in February 2017. In the second paragraph of the preamble, the word "and" is placed before "whereas." In the new second paragraph of the preamble following Trinidad and Tobago, the words "agreed to the dissolution of the Tobago Development Company Limited and the formation of 3 separate entities, including the Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Regulatory and Licensing Authority." In the first paragraph of the resolution, following the words "Tobago House of Assembly," the words "continues its collaboration with the Ministry of Tourism in pursuing mandatory regulations through the Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Regulatory and Licensing Authority for the tourism sector." In the second paragraph of the resolution, following the words "resolve that," the words "this House call upon all tourism stakeholders to pursue and maintain the current established international industry standards." All in favor of the insertions? Any against? Any abstaining? Okay. The question being put, members, is the complete amended motion. Whereas the Executive Council approved the formation of the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited in February 2017, and whereas subsequently the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago agreed to the dissolution of the Tourism Development Company Limited and the formation of 3 separate entities, including the Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Regulatory and Licensing Authority. And whereas the National Tourism Policy of 2010 is now being revised, and whereas there is a 3-year roadmap developed by the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited, and whereas there is no established National Regulatory Tourism Authority by the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, and current standards require only voluntary compliance, be it resolved that the Tobago House of Assembly continues its collaboration with the Ministry of Tourism in pursuing mandatory regulations through the Trinidad and Tobago Tourism Regulatory and Licensing Authority for the tourism sector. Be it further resolved that this House call upon all tourism stakeholders to pursue and maintain the current established international industry standards. All in favor? Aye. Any against? Those abstaining? The motion is carried.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I beg to move that the House stands adjourned to a date to be fixed.
Members, the question is that this House stand adjourned for a date to be fixed. All in favor? Any against? This House stand adjourned for a date to be fixed.